And welcome to the East Bay Regional Park District's Legislative Committee Meeting of April 24th, 2020. It is now 12:30 and our meeting will begin. We'll start our meeting by calling roll. Madam Secretary, would you call roll, please?
Yes. This is Yuli Padmore, Committee Secretary, taking roll. Dennis Waspy, Committee Chair.
Here.
Beverly Lane, Board Member.
Here.
Elizabeth Eccles, Board Member.
Here.
Robert Doyle, General Manager. Sorry, I did that out of order. That was our committee board members. And now I will call roll for the East Bay Regional Park District staff.
Yuli, I'm sorry, the recording is going to have to come from you. It's requesting that the host have permission.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're recording. Director Waspy, my apologies. I don't know what happened there. Can we start from the top now that we're recording?
Surely, I'm here.
Okay, and this is the East Bay Regional Park District Board Legislative Committee meeting on April 24th at 12:30 was the initial start time. And now I'm going to read roll. I'm going to take roll. Dennis Waspy, Committee Chair.
Here.
Beverly Lane, Board Member.
Here.
Elizabeth Eccles, Board Member.
Here.
Thank you, committee board members. I will now take roll for EBRPD staff. Robert Doyle, General Manager.
Here.
Eric Feeler, Chief of Government Affairs and Government and Legislative Affairs.
Here.
Lisa Baldinger, Legislative and Policy Management Analyst.
Here.
Deborah Ocker, AGM of Finance. Here. Jeff, my apologies. Dr. Ana Alvarez. I'm reading from a script. My apologies. Dr. Ana Alvarez, Deputy General Manager.
Here.
Jeff Rasmussen, Assistant Finance Officer.
Here.
Kate Hornbeck, Grants Manager. Here. Rachel Sater, Assistant District Counsel.
Here.
Matthew James, Administrative Analyst.
Here.
Connie Swisher, Confidential Secretary.
Here.
Deborah Fuller, Confidential Secretary.
Here.
And Harold Yamito, my apologies, Harold, for blundering your last name. Sorry about that. Would you mind stating your full name, Harold? Thank you. IS Technician Support.
All right, well, we made it. Today's board committee meeting is held in accordance with Governor Newsom's executive order allowing board members to participate in standing committee meetings remotely. We're providing live audio streaming and have provided the public the opportunity to email or call in prior to the meeting for public comments. This information or any information about this agenda and the agenda itself can be found on the district's website at ebparks.org. You would just go under Board of Directors, Committee Meetings, and then you'll find today's agenda. And we'll move on from there. Uh-oh, Yuli, what did I do wrong this time?
You didn't do anything wrong. I needed to take roll for our legislative advocates, state advocate Doug Houston,
Present.
federal advocate Peter Umhofer.
Present.
Okay, as we move along, do any committee members or any staff members have any questions about our procedures for today? Thank you. Hearing none, we'll move right into state legislation. And our first item is the state response to the COVID-19 virus. And I think General Manager Doyle will start that off.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We have been trying to get work done at the Park District. I'm very satisfied with what we're trying to do, and we're getting better every day at this. That's a big challenge. But I think it's very critical for us to keep track of what's going on at the state and federal level, especially when we anticipate some very significant economic impacts. But there also is some assistance recently passed at the federal level, and I want to make sure that we address that today because our advocates at the state and federal level have done a great job making sure that the Park District is heard and getting a lot of support back from our legislators, both at the state and federal level. So I'll turn it over to Eric, and he can proceed with the meeting.
Sure, and wanted to just basically begin with the state's response and allow Doug some opportunity to speak. But as I think we all know, our governor has been very out front, and our region in particular has been very out front in terms of the stay at home and shelter in place. And I think as the general manager pointed out earlier, we are seeing the benefits of that. The curve is flattening. So our state and our local electeds and public health departments have done a great job in terms of trying to address this head on. We've also seen at a time when people are sheltering in place, how important parks are. We are pretty much the only activity that folks are allowed to participate in. And that's been a very meaningful thing to our community, but also importantly, as Peter, I believe, referenced earlier, to our delegations, both in Sacramento and in Washington. So with that, Doug, I don't know if there's anything specific about the governor's orders and his actions that we would like to address in the initial discussion for the meeting, or if we want to just dive into sort of some of the legislation.
No, Eric, I think we can dive in. Everybody reads the newspaper. Everybody knows what's transpiring. The governor holds nearly daily press conferences to discuss the status of COVID in California. He's been very much on the front line and on the cutting edge in terms of governors and taking a very progressive stance on stay at home. So much so that it may ultimately have some impacts to the state economy and naturally will have an impact, but the trade-off is unacceptable. So in any event, we can proceed.
I think you're muted.
Oh, pardon me. I'm good now, right? Okay, thank you for turning me on. Our first piece of legislation is AB 2148 from Member Quirk.
Sure, and I share this information with sort of a backdrop, and we've got a sort of a disclaimer and a caveat. Now, what you need to know is the legislature's obviously out of session. They did resume session, albeit briefly, to hold subcommittee hearings late last week and then earlier this week around the governor's response to COVID. But aside from that, no one's in Sacramento. So it's my understanding that at least the assembly is intending to resume May 4th. I think that's a little optimistic. And there still has not been a date issued from the Senate side in terms of resumption of business over on that side of things. So I say this to provide, again, a little bit of a backdrop in that members have been instructed not specifically, but encouraged, at least on the assembly side, to take a look at their legislative packets and to sort of cull some of the non-essential bills from their packets, and they have to make that determination at the end of the day. The Senate has been a little bit more forceful with its rank and file members, and leadership is essentially saying, pick 3 to 5 bills. Preferably, they have some direct correlation to COVID, fire, homelessness, some of our priority issues going forward. Otherwise, we just don't have, given the compressed time frames to process legislation, it's not going to make sense. I mean, for example, I believe that, if they were to resume the assembly, that is to resume on May 4th, I believe they have all of 3 weeks of committee process or committee dates to process what can be upwards of 1,800 bills. And it's just not tenable. It's not manageable from a staff standpoint. So I think the speaker is sort of trying to manage some expectations without being too heavy-handed. So I say that because as we're going through these bills and we're contemplating decisions and positions on these bills, we really don't know if they're going to advance or if they're not going to advance, and they're going to be placed in some sort of stall pattern. And turning back, Dennis, to you, the first bill, AB 2148.
Hey, Doug?
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? And I should have said
Sure, of course.
that the bills that we put on the agenda are either deal with economic issues or potentially fire and climate related issues that are existential and will continue, or they're bills that are sponsored by people who are part of our members that are part of our delegation. So
Yeah,
we tried to call it down to a small number, but we also wanted to resume some semblance of normal business for the committee. So that's why most of these bills were chosen.
I think Beverly has a question.
I wonder if you could put the agenda on the screen here. I can't get it on my iPhone, and it's not that easy for me to follow just listening to you. Or maybe everybody else has theirs, but I don't.
Beverly, maybe we can do that, but maybe we could send you a new email with the agenda attached. I don't know if Julie can do that, or someone could. Then you can probably reopen that with a new email. But we'll also bring it up too.
Elizabeth, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. So I've been hearing similar things to Doug about sort of what's going to move and what isn't going to move, and really to put a fine point on it, that probably the bills that are likely to move are either COVID related or safety. And certainly homelessness would fall within safety and COVID both, but so I would be interested as we go through these bills. I don't think it should impact, what we're going to support, because as Eric pointed out, these are broader issues that are ongoing, and some of them are carried by our delegation. So we should support what we think we should want to support. But I would be interested to hear Doug's view on what he thinks of these bills, if they are likely, in his opinion, to move forward or not. It would just be helpful context.
You want me to crystal ball it, huh?
Well, given the criteria that you're hearing,
yeah. Well, it's part of the challenge is, typically in a situation like this, I would visit these offices personally and say,
right.
What are your priorities? We like this bill. What do you think? That's pretty challenging right now. And frankly, folks are still holding everything really close to the chest because, again, the assembly hasn't got specific direction from leadership. So they're not sure how they want to proceed. I know the assembly's probably more motivated to get back to Sacramento than the Senate because they're on a 2-year cycle, assembly members, and campaign season is right around the corner. And not to sound cynical, but they do receive the bulk of their help when they're in Sacramento. So in trying to sort of forecast bills, there we go. We got the agenda up. Is that helpful, Beverly?
Yeah, thank you.
So I would say on the first bill, 2148, there were a host of bills, a number of bills, probably in the order of 10 to 15 bills that were introduced that were trailer bills associated with the climate bond that was proposed in the governor's budget. That proposal is very much up in the air. We'll talk about that a little bit later. However, I wouldn't dismiss this bill as being one of those candidates that will be locked in some sort of stall pattern. This has been a discussion. There's been a deficiency in trying to put together adaptation plans. And yet we have sort of the personnel infrastructure and stakeholder infrastructure throughout the state and regional collaboratives that have been doing a lot of this work. They simply don't have the funding, nor do they have the knowledge base that's required to take steps forward. So as I understand this bill, it would require the SGC to establish criteria for regional climate plans. And then those are important because they include, discussions around sea level rise, fire vulnerability, and the like. So even if this bill does not advance, and it has been assigned through rules, so it's taken a step in the process. Even if it doesn't advance this year, I would suspect it'll be part of ongoing discussions when they resume next year, 21-22 session. So we can tee it up this year, and we'll do what we can in supporting it and advancing it. Assemblymember Quirk's been a great champion, but fingers crossed, no promises.
Well, I don't know how the other board members feel. I feel that I kind of like getting back to some normalcy and doing what we do in the legislative committee, and that's supporting these pieces of legislation, especially like you mentioned, Doug, for a person like Assemblymember Quirk, who is a friend of ours, and I don't know this is on his priority list, but I think anytime I see a bill that mentions adoption of climate change and fire, I tend to wish to support that, whether or not it's going to go or not. And just to get back to normalcy, I wouldn't mind. I don't know how other board members feel about continuing to do what we've been doing, support these, send a letter of support, understanding full well that it might not get the priority that we expected in the past. Do any other board members have any comments on that?
I agree. I think that's really all we can do, and there's no reason why we shouldn't support good legislation, because as Doug just said, and you just said as well, that even if they don't move forward well, first of all, we don't know what's going to move forward and what isn't, but even if they don't move forward right now, they could help form the basis for further discussions. And so I think it is important to support what we believe should be supported.
Director Eccles and all, I would just like to ask that prior to speaking, if you could announce your name so the people listening in know who is responding. Thank you.
Sure. Be happy to. Thanks. That was Director Eccles. Yeah.
Okay. If there are no further comments, what we generally do is do any board members have any comments or questions on this bill, AB 2148?
No, I don't. I move we support.
We have a motion by Director Lane to support.
Second.
And a second by Member Eccles. All in favor. Madam Secretary, could you call a roll, vote by roll call, please?
Yes. My apologies. Roll call would include Director Beverly Lane, Director Elizabeth Eccles, and Chair Dennis Waspy. Motion to support.
I presume we would have all said aye had you called in the roll. So yes, the motion passed unanimously, and we'll move to AB 2551 from Rebecca Bayer Kahan. on preservation of Alameda Tesla expansion area.
Very good. So folks should be familiar with the concept, not this bill number. This is a new bill number. But I think it basically parallels the last ditch effort that the assembly member made working in conjunction with Senator Glazier to try to advance some legislation that would authorize state parks to sell properties for compatible purposes. So the board has been supportive of this concept. I expect they will continue to be supportive. I want to throw a sort of an interesting dynamic that I'm just speculating, but in as much as the state budget is we anticipate is going to be taking a very severe hit, there were a number of pieces contained in that budget that were done so as sort of at the discretion of the governor. One of those was a 20 million set aside for the creation, or the acquisition creation of a new state park, and we suspect was the Livermore area, the Bay Area, spanning 4 different counties. I got to think that that's probably not on the table anymore. And in as much as that $20 million goes away, I could be wrong, and I would invite your GM to participate in this, but I'm just wondering if the governor wants to sort of continue to hold true on his discussion around trying to create a new state park, and would this be a viable alternative? I don't know. I'm throwing it out there because I think it's a curious dynamic, and so I'm looking for any kind of feedback.
From the general manager, this is something we've seen before, that general fund appropriations for parks on a good year in the budget become the first target to reappropriate to other high priorities. There is no restriction on the money because this is not bond fund, it's not park bond fund. It was going to be an appropriation. So I would agree with Doug, this would be very vulnerable. This is also, with all respect to private property rights, this is also the problem when a property owner does not make their best deal and their best timing. We've seen this many times where the economy changes and the money disappears to buy a piece of property, and the property owner has to sit on that property longer. We can update the board on negotiations, but frankly, nothing has happened. The property owner has not responded to suggested offers, so that becomes a casualty of an economic change, and we've all seen that before, and I've certainly seen it in my career many times. The economy also, a downturn also creates an opportunity for people who were less motivated, may become more motivated, and we've seen that happen as well in our 4 recessions that we've had to manage at the Park District. So that's the best I can say now. There's no update, and I would agree with Doug completely that that money is very vulnerable. There is no direct threat to the property. It's a very large piece of very wilderness property that is on the market, and nothing has happened. If somebody else should pick it up, there's very little they could do with that property. So somebody have a very large, big ranch, and it's not really vulnerable to development. It's just something that ourselves and other conservation organizations really thought would be a great wilderness addition. And I have had high-level conversations with the resources secretary about priorities and shifting priorities. And this governor has made it very clear that urban parks are a very high priority to his administration. So that's the best I can speculate on.
Member Lane.
Yes, I have a question about 2551. Is the language that's currently in this the same as it was for the legislation last year, or are there some changes?
I haven't held the two together. I seem to recall that it does parallel that language, but Eric,
It's the same. And I actually had a question about the compensation under the bill, because I know last time around there was a debate about the fund, the level of funding, and that the money would go to the off-highway trust fund. But given the possible economic challenges that the state will have, is there a way for the legislature to change that to going into the general fund, so that if somebody did purchase this property, it would actually help with the general fund, or does it have to go to the off-highway vehicle trust fund?
It was purchased through that fund, and I have imagined that it needs to remain in the fund at the end of the day. There's probably, if it's not constitutional, it's statutory. If it's statutory, anything's possible, Eric.
So from the general manager, I just think that every conversation I've had with the principals on this and prior legislators as well, Assemblywoman Baker, is that the state parks as well as the OHV commission have been very, very forceful in saying that if anything should be sold, it needs to reimburse the acquisition fund for OHV parks. I also would speculate that the opportunity in an economic downturn could be that there are other ways to preserve this property, specifically without having to sell it. The goal of the advocates have always been that it not be expanded for OHV use. Well, the state already owns it. They bought it a long time ago, and it could be preserved with a conservation easement or a commitment or legislative commitment that it can't be used to expand the OHV facility. And that is something, if money becomes extremely hard, which I think it will, that we can talk about other opportunities for preservation.
Right. So is there any further discussion on this bill? If there is none, we have the opportunity, and the staff recommends that we recommend support of this to the full board of directors. Do I have a motion to support this?
I'll move.
We have a motion by member Eccles,
I second.
a second by member Lane. All in favor. Again, Madam Secretary, could you take a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Director Lane,
Aye.
Director Eccles,
Aye.
Director Waspy,
Aye. So the motion passes unanimously. Thank you all very much. We'll move on now to AB 2619, Coastal Resilience Adaptation and Access Fund.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's going back to what I discussed around our first bill. I believe this bill was probably intended to be an enabling piece of legislation around the climate bond. As you have read, OPR administers a program. I think what this bill is intending to do is create a separate program that has a laser focus on sea level rise within OPR's existing programs, and then to create an account that would be specific to address sea level rise within the state of California. I think one of the obvious challenges here is, how do you pay for this? And I noted that one of the funding sources identified is from the State Lands Commission. Those funds are generally fungible, meaning they are used to backfill the general fund. And so I think that that's going to be problematic. However, it's a good concept. I do believe that Assemblymember Stone introduced a similar piece of legislation last year that got caught up in appropriations because of costs. But the notion is good. I think that there needs to be more of a focus on sea level rise, resiliency, and I think this bill is worth supporting.
Doug, if I may, this is the general manager. It's probably important for the audience listening in that we say Office of Planning and Research. So any time we're using Sacramento speak,
Okay.
be good to let the public know what we're talking about.
Fair enough.
All right, Eric, any comments?
No, nothing specific other than I do know that the funding for adaptation is something that the legislature has really been looking for because the greenhouse gas emission funding is more for mitigation. So the idea of a funding stream for adaptation is something that I know Senator Wajkowski and others have been really supportive of. So this is an effort to move that forward, and I think it'll be a continued dialogue even after COVID is over. So.
All right, any questions or comments from board members? Hearing none, we have been given the opportunity to recommend to the full board's support of this. Does anybody want to make a motion?
Yeah, I move that we recommend support of this legislation. And this is Director Eccles.
Lane second.
Moved by Director Eccles, seconded by Member Lane. Madam Secretary, please do a roll call vote.
Yes. Director Lane,
Aye.
Director Eccles,
Aye.
Director Waspy.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you all very much. We'll move on to the Senate side where Senator Glazer has introduced Senate Bill 1147, the preservation of Carnegie State Vehicular Recreation Area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this bill is very much a spot bill. I don't think that it's been amended to insert any more substantive language. It has not been assigned to a policy committee at this juncture, and I don't know if, I think the deadlines have probably passed. So for all intents and purposes, this bill is more than likely not going to advance this year. I suspect that it was introduced as a companion for 2551. And that's not to say that Senator Glazer doesn't have other vehicles that can be used for this purpose if need be. But I just thought I'd provide you folks with that disclaimer.
All right, thank you. Any questions or comments on this bill?
This is Government Affairs Manager Eric Feeler. That the idea of putting this on here is just to make sure that you all were aware that the senator was continuing his work on the Tesla area, and we were just recommending a watch at, given that it's there's no real substance in the actual bill.
Okay, well, if there are no questions or comments from board members, I would suggest that do we vote on a watch deal? Although we should probably bring it to the full board because they might want to watch it also. Does anybody have any advice, or would anybody like to move that we recommend to the full board that we watch this?
I move we watch.
Thank you, Member Lane. We have a motion to watch. And I'm hoping we'll get a second.
Okay, it's Director Eccles. I'm happy to second. I doesn't feel like we really need to recommend to the board to watch because it seems like that's the default, but happy to provide a second if that's what you would like.
Thank you. My only reason for doing that is this will probably, well, this definitely will be in the brought before the full board with a little bit of this content.
Okay.
Anyway, we have a motion and a second. Go ahead, Eric.
Director Waspy, can I make a recommendation, since we did take action on the assembly version of the bill, and we will be bringing that to the board? Why don't, if it would be okay with the committee, we could include a reference to the senator's bill in the resolution supporting the assembly member's bill. So we would need a separate resolution on a watch.
I don't think I understand.
Okay.
This is basically the same concept as Assemblymember Bauer Cahan's legislation with regard to Tesla and Carnegie, and we did take a position on that already in this meeting. And what I'm proposing is that in the resolution that goes to the board for the Assemblymember bill, that we reference the Senate bill as a companion piece of legislation, and so we wouldn't have to do a separate resolution to the board for a watch position.
I am totally okay with that. If Member Lane would like to remove her motion.
Okay. So then we wouldn't talk about watching.
We wouldn't need a separate resolution for watching. We would put it in the resolution for Bauer Kahan's legislation.
By reference.
Correct.
Okay, I'm good with that too.
Okay,
Sounds good. Thank you.
we've withdrawn that, and we will in fact watch this and include it with Assemblymember Mayor Khan's recommendation. So now we'll move to SB 1296, the Career Pathways and Climate Resiliency Grant Programs.
Yeah, so this is a very novel piece of legislation. I think it's very well intended, well meaning, and it requires the 10 state conservancies in the state of California, along with the Wildlife Conservation Board and then the California Natural Resources Agency, to establish programs that support climate beneficial and resiliency projects. And I think underscoring this piece of legislation, it's really trying to create what it's intended to create is nature and career pathways to parks and conservation type projects and programs. It seeks to make sure that in moving forward, that any kind of these projects that are yielded through the creation of these new programs through these entities. There's workforce development associated with them, job placement, and that they work with various nonprofits to make sure that the programs yield those sorts of outcomes. And as the summary notes, it's important for us in the urban areas, and we think it would definitely benefit the district's future workload around conservation projects. Now, going back to crystal balling, Board Member Eccles, it's going to take money to put these programs together. I suspect it'll exceed what's called the appropriations threshold by a significant amount. And in as much as some of the other things that have been included in this year's budget will probably fall by the wayside around this topic, this will be a challenge to move forward, but that shouldn't discourage you from taking a support position on this. I just don't know if this particular bill will be elevated within Senator Durazo's portfolio to warrant, one of her priority bills. I'm not that close to it. So.
Any questions or comments by board members? Eric, do you have anything to add?
The only piece that I really would add is because the conservancies are statewide and often in a rural, protecting rural areas, this could be an important program in the future for job creation in some of the more economically sensitive parts of the state. So we felt like it was a good thing to support, not just for the Park District and for our urban area, but for some of the more rural areas that could be impacted.
Okay, if there's no further questions or discussions, we have been asked by staff for a recommendation of support to the full board. Do I have a motion?
Sure, I'd be happy to make a motion. I think this is a really good program and important for developing the future workforce, as well as getting young people and others interested in these types of jobs. So yeah, Doug's crystal balling notwithstanding, I absolutely agree that we should support this. So so moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Eccles, a second by Director Lane. Madam Secretary, would you please do a roll call vote?
Yes. Director Lane.
Aye.
Director Eccles.
Aye.
Chair Director Waspy.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much. And we'll move now to SB 1323. Senator Skinner's California Carbon Sequestration and Climate Resiliency Project Registry.
Yeah, Well, this bill would require California Natural Resources Agency to work with Cal EPA in collaboration and trying to identify carbon sequestration goals for natural and working lands. The bill will go a little further, require these offices to maintain a registry called the California Carbon Sequestration Resiliency Project Registry. And I think, and funding would be available. No, I'm sorry, funding wouldn't be available, but once you've identified properties that would be candidates for this registry, the state or private entities could then put forward funding to acquire some of these lands. And I have to imagine, and I didn't read through the bill, but this looks like an offset piece of legislation to me that would assist primarily private entities that, instead of buying into the auction program, and maybe Eccles, you would know more about this, that would provide them with that option to acquire lands and seek credit offsets to meet carbon compliance. Obviously would help the district in as much as we could maybe offer up candidate lands or even acquire some of these lands for acquisition, continuity, wildlife corridors and the like. So.
Questions, or Eric, do you have anything to add?
I think Doug's right on the offset intent of the bill. And I also think that it's an effort to get the state's head around prioritization of projects. So the registry would be the list of projects, but then there would be some prioritization administered by the Natural Resources Agency and EPA.
Okay, any questions, comments by board members? Hearing none, we have a recommendation of support.
I move we support SB 1323.
I'd be happy to second. Director Eccles speaking.
We have a motion by Director Lane and a second by Director Eccles. Madam Secretary, would you take a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Director Lane,
Aye.
Director Eccles,
Aye.
Chair Director Waspy.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. And now, thank you very much. We now move to other state matters, and the climate stimulus bond is our first item. Doug, is that you?
I don't know, Robert or Eric, do you want to tee it up at all, or you want me to launch?
Happy to just state that back when we met in January, we were talking about a climate resources bond to deal with a changing climate and wildfire, and sort of more proactively investing in resource management, natural resource management. Obviously, things have changed since January, and the discussion now is, would there be any kind of a bond? And if so, what does that look like for resources and also job creation? And I'm happy to add more to that, but I think Doug, maybe you or the general manager might want to pick it up from there, and then we can talk a little bit about what we've been hearing locally throughout the Bay Area on it too.
Okay. Robert, anything?
I'll go ahead and just, I want to thank Doug and Eric for being a lead on this, and Lisa as well. We've been coordinating with all the Bay Area agencies to keep breathing life into a climate and flood bond, but it really looks like it's going to be stalled. But that could change again, or it could morph into a, as Eric said, a more job-related or infrastructure. An infrastructure bond would generate a lot of jobs, and I think that would be something that we certainly would support as well. I just don't think we know yet. But I've had some conversations with some of the executive directors of organizations and nonprofits, and they're all watching this very closely. But it's I think Doug has his, or I should say, Mr. Houston has his finger on the pulse of what's going on. But I really don't think we know. But it is logical uh, that we're going to look at more of a recovery. Maybe it's a natural resource bond helping with recovery, but it's not going to be the traditional climate and flood or natural resource bond that we've seen, or park bond that we've seen in the past. So we shall see, but we hope with the impact that we have seen on parks and the popularity of parks and the demand for parks and the lack of ability to manage these huge crowds, that a way of encouraging construction jobs through parks that can improve some of these projects. The district is faced with a future where we are doing pretty good with land acquisition funding, but the cost of the big projects that we're doing now, we've seen those costs double. The recession may bring that down, but the big things we have to do. If you think about Roberts Park, you think about Lake Temescal, you think these are all multi-million dollar projects. So if it could be a job related natural resource effort, maybe that could get more traction. Doug.
Well, I think you both did a nice job of explaining sort of where we've been and where we're going. Maybe I'll fill in some of the blanks. So I would just say stay tuned. May 10th will be very telling. That's when the governor releases his May revise. As you may recall, as part of the original budget, there was a $4.5 billion climate resiliency bond included. Most folks are speculating that that will not be part of the May revise. However, there's a lot of work afoot, and there is even polling underway currently, and there'll be a second poll within a few weeks, to try to gauge voter sentiment, one around this notion of this bond, primarily one of the two vehicles, SB 45. And then secondly, the second poll will really focus in on economic recovery and how voters perceive investments in green infrastructure as contributing to California's economic recovery. So Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia, Chair of Water, Parks and Wildlife, is very much dug in. He's continuing to work on this effort, as is Assemblymember Mullen out of the Bay Area. And then we have two senators, Ben Allen from Santa Monica, and then Henry Stern. We're doing yeoman's work on the Senate side to try to keep the momentum. I did have conversations with both Eduardo and then Henry Stern yesterday. They're dug in. They want this to happen. They're just trying to get a read from the administration as to the level of importance of a climate bond or just a bond in general. And I would note, and this is just a personal message, their bonds are one of the few ways that we can infuse dollars back into the economy as a state government. We don't have the ability, as they do back in DC, to just print money. So it seems to, for many economists, bonding seems to make sense. And if we harken back to 2005-06, where we were suffering from some recessionary cycles in California, then Governor Schwarzenegger took it upon himself in working with the legislature to string together a series of bonds, measures, propositions 1A through 1E, and that also included Proposition 84. And those were done in a way to try to jumpstart the economy. Folks are very aware of that dynamic, and I don't think they want to dismiss it. It's just, we just don't know how deep the economic hole is going to be come at the end of this year, going into next year. And is it smarter to hold off and to postpone paying down on debt, or go ahead and invest in hopes that, you know, the multiplier associated with infusing the economy with more money will yield benefits? So it's just, we're just in sort of one of those stay tuned modes. A lot of folks want this. A lot of folks are within the legislature think there are better ways to bond for different types of projects, including transportation, housing. I don't know if they're mutually exclusive, but so long as we can, again, infuse dollars back into the economy for green jobs, I'm all for it, and I think the district should be all for it as well.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think a couple of comments from the general manager. I think that one thing to remember, it was a pretty big controversy over Prop 1, the transportation measure, and that was just resolved recently. So looking at a gas tax, especially with the gas prices the way they are, they're cheaper, but any of those things are probably just off in another land. But the argument against a bond is that that's a debt on the general fund. So that is usually whenever we are pushing for a statewide bond of some kind, it's always the argument against it is this is a first call on future debts of the state on the general fund. What Doug is saying, but you cannot generate enough funds immediately as a transfusion or a stimulus by taking that out of the general fund. That's a big chunk of the rainy day funding. So a bond, of the choices, a bond is still less expensive over time. As a cash flow, it's less expensive to generate a lot of money up front. You can get the money now, you pay it over time, and yes, you pay interest, and that's the argument. It costs you more with interest and principal on a bond, but it allows you to generate money faster without having an immediately big hit on the general fund. And I think that's kind of the debate we're looking at here. I think that's right, Doug.
Yeah, and even I mean, even if a bond were approved, you're not paying debt on that instrument until you appropriate the funds. So more to come.
Yeah, this is Eric Feeler, Government Affairs Manager. I'd just like to reiterate what Doug said, that I think that, and the General Manager, that this is one way around not taking funding out of the general fund. You know, the state can't print money like the feds. So in order to infuse the economy, a bond is the likely vehicle to do so. And obviously the state would want to control that through the legislature if at all possible. And I know that the assembly members have been trying to reach out to the governor, and the timing hasn't been great in terms of his commitment to looking at this. So there's still ongoing discussions. But I also wanted to see if Lisa wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about what we've heard regionally on the bond, and some of the conversations that we've had in the I guess it's Together Bay Area, of the former Bay Area Open Space Council, because I think it's interesting to hear what other agencies have been thinking about with regard to a climate stimulus bond. So if Lisa Baldinger is available, I'd value having her comment on that.
Oh, good afternoon. Lisa Baldinger, Legislative and Policy Management Analyst. As Eric referenced, he and I have been working with Together Bay Area, which is formerly known as the Bay Area Open Space Council, and specifically their policy committee, led by Shalana De Silva, their legislative director. And what we're looking at is translating the efforts of the climate package, which we've had many discussions on, the benefits of projects such as Dotson Family Marsh and Bay Point, where we have the shoreline protection, but also looking at how many jobs those types of projects are able to create when we invest in these large infrastructures. And so Together Bay Area is working regionally with agencies such as ourselves, Mid-Peninsula, Santa Clara open space, and to put together a package of regional infrastructure projects and the amount of jobs that come out of each individual project to share with the legislator in terms of the green jobs that such a package would provide in addition to climate friendly and ready projects. So we hope to bring forward some finalized survey data at the next legislative committee.
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
The sooner we can get that information, Lisa, the better. That was something that was specifically recommended by Senator Stern yesterday during my conversation. He just said, we need economic data. We need quantifiable information that we can share with our leadership and with the administration, demonstrate the benefits associated with this, because we're sort of shooting in the dark right now. So the more information that we can provide that is fact-based would be really helpful.
Absolutely.
And Doug, just toward that end, this is Eric Feeler again. And I know, I believe Deborah Acker, our CFO and Assistant General Manager for Management Services is on the line, but just to let you know that we have had those conversations internally, and we're looking at possibly finding some help from the outside to really provide data that's very justifiable in terms of job creation. And I know when we reached out to find out how many jobs were created by the Bay Point project, I personally was surprised that it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 folks between the contractors for both the construction and also the design and planning of it. So it's a significant impact, and we'll get as many numbers to you as quickly as we can.
All right. Thank you all for your reports. Any board members have any comments or questions?
Well, I would just say if you can say that 200 worked on Bay Point, Dotson Marsh must be an extraordinary number of jobs.
And that's a very good point, Director Lane. I think something for the board to be thinking about is, as you look at your priority projects, those projects that would generate jobs are going to be really important. So some of these public access components, some construction components. One really good example is the McCosker property restoration at Sibley is a huge project, and it's going to employ lots of different contractors, not just earth moving construction, but a lot of bridge building and a lot of those things. So that's just something to be thinking about as we shift some priorities to match where the economy goes. For us internally, what saves us money is very important. Obviously, what saves us doing more work by having better infrastructure, and what generates jobs is important as well. So what we've done in the last 10 years, a lot more big construction projects. You think of the Bay Trail at Albany, you think of the Albany Beach, you think of Dotson Marsh, you think of Bay Point. These are multiple private construction companies leaving with multi-million dollars that they've employed people in doing. So I think that puts us in a stronger position if we are shovel ready, kind of like we did with the $10 million Tiger grant. If we are shovel ready and we have these ready, but we haven't had the matching money, this could be a possibility at some point to be ready and say, these generate a lot of jobs, and they also lower our costs internally for updating the infrastructure. Think of Roberts Pool. How many urban kids get to go swimming there in a hot summer? That having that investment helps young people, but it also drives construction.
Great, thank you. If there are no further questions or comments, I'd like to thank staff, all the staff who did such a great report here and are working in the background to make this work out for the Park District. And I hope it will. It is a period of uncertainty, but we keep up the great work in advocating for us. We come to the point now where it says other state matters. Are there any other state matters? I know there are, but any that relate to us? Seeing nobody volunteering, we'll move on to the federal legislation, and we'll welcome our federal legislative advocate, Peter Umhofer. Peter, welcome. And our first item is the federal response to the COVID-19 virus. I'm not sure who wants to start first. It's listed as the general manager, and then Peter. I'm not sure, whichever order you'd like to go in.
Well, I just do want to comment personally. It's wonderful to actually see Peter. It's one of the benefits of a Zoom versus having to go back and travel. So, Peter, I hope you and your family are well. I know it's an incredibly busy, intense time in Washington, and there's been a lot of action there, and we're trying to unpack everything that's going on. And we know that you've been able to include the Park District in some of the legislative priorities, so we qualify. And I really want to express the board and the district's appreciation for your efforts. So we can, unless Eric wants to make a comment, we'll turn it right over to Peter.
Just I echo your comments, General Manager, and just want to make it known to the board that Peter's really been on it from the beginning. We were getting calls from him and emails from him pretty much as soon as this broke out, and his prediction at that time was there's going to be a lot of money coming out of Washington and we need to be on it. And so I thought it would be great to have him give a little bit of an update about what has happened and what he thinks might be happening. I guess the proverbial crystal ball, but I think there's some actual opportunities in Washington in terms of some of the legislation that's coming through, and the support of our delegation, which has been really tremendous. I think people really have seen the role parks are playing at this time, and I think that's resonated both in Sacramento, but particularly in Washington. And so I think, Peter, if you could go ahead and just give an update, and then I know we have a couple bills, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the economy after we go through the bills.
Sure. Give a brief overview. Many of you are aware of what Congress has done in the month of March. There were 3 bills that passed. First bill was an immediate bill dealing with the crisis of the coronavirus pandemic and the immediate funding needs that needed to be provided to various agencies. So that was passed, 3 bills passed in the month of March. It's extraordinary effort. To date, Congress has passed bills totaling over $3 trillion. The first bill was $8.3 billion. The second bill was called the Families First Act, was over $200 billion. That expanded beyond emergency relief and dealing with hospitals and testing and research, but also getting into paid leave and unemployment insurance and various programs, food stamp programs that needed a significant boost right away. The third bill many people have heard about called the CARES Act, covers $2.3 trillion, a variety of programs that needed to have immediate funding. I was looking a little bit beyond the immediate need beyond the testing, but getting into treatment and vaccines and a whole host of federal agencies that needed money and needed it quickly in order to bring all hands on deck within the federal government. It's been extraordinary to watch and to communicate with people. It's get into that a little bit more. This fourth bill that was signed today by the president totals $484 billion. Specifically, a lot of the money that many of you probably saw in the news dealing with small business assistance and relief. That was $370 billion. $75 billion went to hospitals. $25 billion went to testing and other things related to testing. And there was $60 billion for emergency loans and grants. There's been a lot of statements made about what the fifth bill would entail. I can talk a little bit about that. Senate Democratic leaders and House Democratic leaders have talked about a broad package that would cover infrastructure, housing, election security, frontline and first responders and workers, and state and local aid. White House has talked about some amount for state and local governments, infrastructure spending, a payroll tax cut and tax breaks for restaurants and entertainment and sports interests. There's a lot of work already being done behind the scenes on this fifth bill. There were statements made by Speaker Pelosi today, the hope that they would address and pass this bill in May. The House and Senate are scheduled to be back around May 4th. In my conversations with many senior staff, it's not clear if they will be returning on May 4th or not. That's the plan, public plan, but there is a lot of work that'll need to be done in order to get to yes and have this fifth bill ready that they could vote on by May 4th. We've seen it's taken a little bit longer to address each bill. There's a deep, deep philosophical difference amongst members on whether state and localities should be getting a significant amount of aid. The National Governors Association has said $500 billion is what is needed. There's been several estimates between $300 billion and $1 trillion needed to states and localities. A strong argument to be made that states and localities are essential for small businesses and that aid is needed and aid is needed now. A lot of Democratic leaders were pushing to have an increase in the current funding, which is $150 billion for states and localities. And as part of this fourth bill that was signed into law today, they were really pushing for another $150 billion, but that was not agreed to. And so that's why there'll be a fifth bill and probably a sixth bill as well. My prediction is that, again, this fifth bill will be COVID related and this sixth bill will ultimately be an infrastructure bill. It's hard to see how there's just so many different pieces that need to come together into an infrastructure bill. I can stop there, or I can just give some other quick highlights on some of the other things I've been working with the delegation on and how the Park District has had an impact.
I would love to hear it, Peter.
Okay. So been in close contact with the Treasury Department, but also with the congressional delegation on ensuring that the Park District is favorably considered in its request for immediate assistance under the State and Local Assistance Program. It is titled the Coronavirus Relief Fund for State and Local Governments. And the Park District did an excellent job of very quickly putting together a complete and thorough letter justifying the reasons for the immediate relief that is needed. That also was amplified by a delegation letter that was sent to the Treasury Department by members of the House of Representatives that represent the Park Districts. And that was sent earlier this week. And that was really helpful and hopefully will continue to make the case. If the Park District is not successful in getting assistance because there's not enough money in the current program, I think the Park District is well positioned in this next round of funding to be eligible. We'll continue to make the case as the Park District is a special district under the California law, and that tends to be confusing, not to our delegation, but to others, and justify that this is one of the few places, as we've talked about earlier, one of the few activities people can do right now. And it's important for a lot of different reasons. I'll stop there and answer any questions.
Here, this is Eric Feeler again. I just wanted to also point out in the CARES legislation that the minimum amount of constituents or citizens you could serve in order to qualify for the local assistance is 500,000.
That's right.
By that definition, we are one of the few entities in the East Bay, and in fact, the Bay Area, that actually serve the population that meets that threshold. So the city of Oakland doesn't even meet 500,000. So I think it strengthens our case as a service entity and local government that serves 2.7 million. And as Peter has indicated, we are open. We are actually serving an essential service, essential activity. And the case for some of the resources that we've put in due to the COVID, I think is pretty strong. And we're going to continue to make that case with the delegation and the Department of Treasury and at the state level. We also submitted a letter to the governor, depending on, I think some of the rules about how this money is going to flow down are still being worked on. So we want to cover all of our bases and make sure that we're expressing our interest at every level.
I'm sure people are wondering when Treasury is going to make an announcement. They've been issuing guidance this week, and my best guess is that it is going to be early next week when they start to make decisions. They're getting a lot of pressure, though, to in this next bill to consider localities under the 500,000 population. And Senator Feinstein and several other senators, bipartisan group, have strongly encouraged that the next round of state and local funding needs to consider all localities and counties. So that's just something to be aware of, but thanks for mentioning that, Eric.
Peter, thank you so much for, this is Director Eccles. Thank you very much for the update. Really very helpful. I'm interested to know, with the Coronavirus Relief Fund for state and local government as it currently exists, does it specifically say anything about special districts? I know if it doesn't.
It does not, but if you read, been in touch with Park District Council and with others on the legislative intent here, it's clear the Park District is eligible, and because it's considered local government, but it does not say the magic word special district, which is one of the things I'm working on. But we can talk about that in a bit, but I'm hopeful that there'll at least be a strong case made. I think we've made the best case we can to the Treasury Department, but also position ourselves for this next bill and the amount of money that will be included in that for state and local government.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Beverly, do you have anything to add or a question?
Well, Peter, have you ever seen anything like this? I mean, this is just, I'm just listening from the outside and news and other things, and I can barely get my arms around it. There are so many diverse things happening.
Yes. And then put on top of that, there is, national guidance being given every day at 5 o'clock by the leading health professionals in this country. And so on the hour, things are changing. And then to answer your question, I've never seen Congress move at this pace to address something that is so serious for our country, but just this amount of money at this time is pretty extraordinary. It is starting to cause members to pause and raise questions about the debt and deficit and what we should truly be doing in the next fifth and sixth bills. And so I don't know it's going to get any easier. It's probably going to become a little harder to legislate, but there's a great need out there, and the economic data is showing that the government's going to need to continue to invest in projects and people.
All right. Thank you very much, Peter. And thanks again for all your great efforts back there. And
I have another question.
oh, pardon me. Go ahead, Elaine.
You know, the other thing that's happening with people is all kinds of conspiracy theories floating all over. Would you say people are addressing this on a fairly even keel, or are people with actual responsibilities going way off the rails, so that's another thing that has to be taken care of or dealt with?
I guess I'll focus on the House and Senate and governors in answering your question.
I know someone's off the rails, but I was wondering about everybody else.
Most members to date have been pragmatic and reasonable and know that they have never seen and faced anything like this, and that the public pressure is going to continue to build on them to help the American public with very basic needs. And to that end, I think that they're working well together. But the countervailing pressure point is their constituents or their political philosophy of, thinking about the debt and deficit, or not wanting to spend money that we don't have, or even if we're in a crisis, is also weighing on elected members as well. What is the best way to help people or programs to find a treatment, to find a vaccine, to help people in need? There's just a lot of tug and pull amongst House and Senate members. I don't know if that answers your question, Director Lane.
Well, it does seem that while there's some far out kinds of things coming out of different people in the Congress, that they seem to be actually addressing issues a little bit more than they were in February.
Nothing like a crisis to bring people together. And I don't think anyone wanted to have this kind of crisis at all, but they've come together and passed some extraordinary legislation in a very short period of time. The hope now is that they continue to do that. I think an infrastructure bill is going to take a little bit more time because you've got transportation, you've got water resources. It could incorporate education and housing. It just depends on the scope and scale, what the Congress and the administration want to achieve.
All right. Thank you, Peter, so much. And I'd like to compliment the staff and our legislative folks for this letter that's generated for our delegation for the Coronavirus Relief Fund for state and local governments. I think it's a great letter. And is this posted in our agenda packet or in our minutes? And other board members got this, or this letter just can't come to the committee?
It should go as board correspondence, but I'll let Eric answer that.
Okay.
I just was going to say, I believe we did send it to all the board members, but we will double check that after the meeting.
Excellent. I think it's really well written and well done, and it's a great ask.
And that's before we go, I did have a question for Peter that he may. Peter, we have a lot of small businesses that are our concessionaires. They're really mom and pop. They're very small, but they're very important to the Park District. If they go out of business, we won't get them back. I mean, they're unique.
Right.
So I know there was a lot of controversy over the small business grants related to bigger businesses getting a lot of that money.
Correct.
Is that on the table for further discussion of the really truly small businesses? Because even though we're the public agency, these small businesses are private businesses, and they perform an important part of the recreation we provide, from renting kayaks to fishing to
Mm.
the merry-go-round. They provide a lot of benefit for families and children. And so I just something, if you have any perspective on that.
Sure. It's a really good question. Shake Shack got a lot of criticism this week. You probably heard about that on the news, but they are, quote unquote, returning the money. Some of the money, some of these companies or entities were awarded the money, but had not received the money. And so that's a nuance that's just important worth noting. But for Treasury, they have indicated that they want to make sure that the money is truly going to small businesses, and are going to be issuing some additional guidance along those lines. A deep concern always is when you move at this incredibly fast pace, and such pressure to, quote unquote, get the money in the hands of small businesses and out the door as quickly as possible, there will be errors. And that's just part of the time that we're in right now. But Treasury is trying to be as deliberate as possible, but they're having to stand up multiple programs simultaneously: airlines, small business relief, and state and local assistance. Herculean task. Some other agencies I thought they might, I'm sure they're tapping into, that have incredible capabilities like USDA and EPA that know how to run large programs distributing money. So I hope that's helpful in answering your question, General Manager.
I just want to make sure we're keeping our eye on the fact. I'll give you a really good example. Our Camp Arroyo is about a $30 million investment in public funds to provide Alameda schools with really important educational camps. The organizations that run that for us really have had to lay off all their staff because they're closed. And it's really hard to reboot that. And it could even be the final straw for some of these organizations. But in talking to the city of San Francisco, it's the same issue with how important day camp facilities, camping facilities are for parents who are both working and struggling. And the kids really need these camps so the parents can go back to work. And so if the private employed staff doesn't have a job, those can't happen. And so I just think that's a pretty important thing that probably has a pretty broad state to state impact for these type of programs, because a lot of them are run by a small camp group or company or concession. Some are run by the cities, but a lot are run, like we're doing ours, by other people. And this could make, like so many other businesses, but this could make or break that opportunity for children and families, and for families to go back to work and the children have a place that's safe for education and recreation. So it's something I think is appealing and important to us in particular.
Thank you for mentioning it. I'll make sure that's part of my reminder to the delegation and
thank you.
My conversations with the Congress.
Director Lane, do you have a comment?
Well, I have a question really for Bob, and that is, as these programs are coming out from the federal government, it takes some skills to apply for them. So have we been able to help any of our concessionaires in those applications?
We haven't done that, Director Lane. What we have been doing, though, is reducing doing everything we can to keep them going from the district side, including funding. So you have seen that already, I believe, on several organizations where they owe us money and we've said, you're not going to be charged rent for 2 months or 3 months because we want you to stay afloat during this time so we can have you come back. So what we've mainly been doing is reducing their financial impacts as best as we can. But as far as actually helping them apply, we can look into that, but I don't think we've had the bandwidth ourselves to be able to do that.
Yeah, I know it really does. We need that bandwidth, but it seems to me that we are pretty accomplished in doing these things, and that might be something at least to discuss.
Yeah, I think we should outreach. We have great liaison through Tiffany Margalucci in our business services team to coordinate with those groups. But I think that's one to put on the table is, can we help? Is there something we can do to steer you in the right direction? Because for a lot of people who aren't used to ever doing this, this is not only new legislation, it's new for them to even look at. So that's something we could, it's like I said, with trying to get seasonals who are unemployed to navigate into the COVID emergency funding leave. So we agreed and the board approved us helping to provide additional information to those young people who may do very well by getting that money, but have never done anything like that. So they're going to need help. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is I've seen some nonprofits who have had somebody who really sat down and went through all the CARES elements, and they're doing some figuring out of how to apply. And some of the applications are pretty darn simple.
Yeah,
But they're not as complicated as you might think. So with a little bit of assistance, it could make a big difference.
well, we will. That's a great idea, and we'll certainly look at. Yeah, there's a big difference between the Tiger Grant program and getting this assistance for sure. So that's a great suggestion. I'm sure that staff will take a look at that and embrace it because we want the businesses that have been established that are really working well with us. We don't want to lose them because there's a lot that aren't always the best. They struggle. And so we want to keep the ones we know have a good track record.
And along those lines, I'd just like to offer, I got a email from Steve Harker, our concessionaire at Redwood Canyon Golf Course, and he is actively lobbying, in this case, a county supervisor to reopen the golf course. So he's advocating for the opening of that, and I don't think he's requesting any help, but monetary help, but he's ready to go, and he's working very hard behind the scenes to do that.
Yeah, yes, Dennis, that's exactly the same one. Two of our biggest concessionaires are Tilden and Redwood Canyon, as far as, a lot of people, a lot of jobs, a lot of work, high intensity work that they've got to be made. Even if you're not playing golf, they've got to be maintained, they've got to be watered. So it's been a very high priority of the park leadership in the Bay Area to discuss the reopening of golf courses, because we believe that's one of the places you can do social distancing pretty well. And, we would not allow for restaurants to be open directly in a building, but to be able to, with a lot of private companies already are doing golfing, and, they do the extra cleaning of the carts. They do the only one person in a cart if they have carts. And I think I'm optimistic on the golf courses.
Well, and police dispatch had a few people on Tilden already, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, I think we can move along from there unless anybody has any questions or comments. Again, Peter, thank you so much, and staff, thanks for all your great work in working that. But we do have some, I won't call them mundane items, but we are, the federal government is still working on, we've got greenhouse gases and we got wildfires in the future. So we'll move right to Senate Bill 3269, the Clean Economy Act of 2020.
Eric Feeler, Government Affairs Manager, and since we have Peter with us, I will invite him to weigh in on federal legislation. But this particular bill we put on from the jobs creation standpoint. It's intended to obviously reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, but it has a very strong labor and job training component to it. So it's really about trying to get people who need an opportunity, need a ladder to opportunity into the clean economy. And it provides job training for them to move up that ladder. So for the Bay Area, being at the forefront of some of these technologies, this actually could be a very good piece of legislation to get some of our workforce back online as we come out of the COVID crisis. So that's why we wanted to put it on here and have a recommendation of support, but I would also invite Peter to make any comments on it at this time.
Eric, you did an excellent job summarizing the bill. As many of you are aware, that the federal government is, and Congress has increasingly been focused on climate change legislation and a series of bills that have been introduced in this Congress, and not just by Democrats, but also by Republicans as well, looking at solutions through climate resilience related projects or through doing resilient projects in the armed services. There's been a lot of interesting collaboration behind the scenes that doesn't get a lot of press attention. That's all to say this bill is important, as Eric outlined, brought together labor unions, environmental and conservation groups, as well as some companies. And I think it is an important time to weigh in and state support for this legislation. There'll be increasing attention on climate change even after we get through this terrible pandemic. The science continues to paint a serious challenge for the United States and the rest of the world when it comes to climate change. And this bill directs and gives a lot of flexibility, directs the agencies to come up with federal plans as to how to get to that goal of net greenhouse gas emissions, net emissions no later than 2050. And there'll be a variety of different bills that will be introduced, but this one has a good amount of support. I think it's timely to weigh in.
All right, thank you. Any comments from directors? Hearing none, is there a motion to support this bill?
Moved by Director Eccles.
Second, Lane.
We have a motion by Director Eccles, a second by Member Lane. Madam Secretary, we call a roll call vote.
Yes. Director Lane,
Aye.
Director Eccles,
Aye.
Chair Director Waspy.
Aye. Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. We'll move now to Senate Bill 3288, protecting unique and beautiful landscapes by investing in California Lands Act.
So Eric Feeler, Government Affairs Manager, I will start and again invite Peter to make comments, but this is basically a repackaging of 3 bills that have passed the House that deal with wilderness and resource protection expansion throughout the state of California. And what was particularly of interest to the district is it includes Representative Jared Huffman's legislation that deals with the redwoods and Northern California coast. As part of that legislation, there's some focus on oak woodlands, which is relevant to the park district. There's also focus on wildfire vegetation management and protection from wildfire. And then lastly, there's a partnership with Save the Redwoods League in that legislation that raises awareness about the climate and other benefits of redwoods, which also could relate to our own park, a Reinhardt Redwood Park. So for the reason that bill is included in this package, and that it's also our senator from California that's carrying this, we felt like it would be worth of support from the district.
Questions or comments? Oh, pardon, Peter, do you have any?
Sure. I can just add a few other items to Eric's excellent summary. The bill that Senator Harris is introducing is combining 3 bills that passed the House on February 12th. So these 3 bills combined will add several new designations to areas, national wild and scenic river designations, creating new conservation areas, establishing additional wilderness. It's pretty significant in Northern California, on the Central Coast, and in the San Gabriel Mountains. And so Senator Harris has combined these bills together and introduced this bill in the Senate. There's been a lot of discussion about an energy or lands package, or package of lands bills that could pass later this year. And we can get into that a little bit later, but just to say, I think this is timely and worth the Park District support.
Questions, comments by board members? Hearing none, do I have a motion to support?
So moved from Lane.
Director Eccles seconds.
A motion by member Lane and a second by member Eccles to support this. Madam Secretary, we take a roll call vote, please.
Yes. Director Lane,
Aye.
Director Eccles,
Aye.
Chair Director Waspy,
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Our next item is Senate Bill 3422, the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the Great American Outdoors Act.
Yeah, hi, Eric Fueler, Government Affairs Manager again. This is a culmination of some efforts from a broader coalition on land and water, and also park maintenance for the National Park Service and other public lands. So it's a fairly comprehensive bill that would permanently fund the land and water conservation at $900 million annually. As we all remember, we were in DC when the permanent authorization passed a couple years ago now, but the level of funding was not permanently authorized or permanently endowed at $900 million, or appropriated. So this bill would make that $900 million appropriated annually, sort of like an entitlement or a permanent funding stream, which we have long supported. The general manager had a great letter to the editor couple days ago commenting on the Chronicle's op-ed on support for land and water at this time. And this is something that we can do to invest in economy and job creation. And it's not taxpayer money. It comes from the offshore oil leases and drilling practices. The other part of this legislation is actually been in the works for a long time. It's the infrastructure maintenance funding for public lands, and it's a $9.5 billion over 5 years investment. And it does have bipartisan support. Obviously, you can see on the staff memo there that it's sponsored by a Republican from Colorado and a very, very moderate Democrat from West Virginia. So we're hopeful, I believe, and I'll let Peter speak to his crystal ball on this, but I think we're hopeful that this is the type of thing that could pass even at this time of the COVID pandemic. But Peter, any other thoughts?
Difficult to predict I'll step back for a second and say pre-pandemic, this bill was ready to go to the Senate floor and pass. The White House and the president had stated support for the bill. The bill was introduced on March 10th, and it was scheduled to be voted on when in the month of March. And there definitely would have been attempts to add amendments or add bills and make improvements to it, but the structure of the bill would have definitely remained intact. There was strong bipartisan support. Over 60 senators were ready to vote for it. Now the question becomes, is the focus in the rest of the Congress going to be on emergency relief and economic assistance to get the country back in better shape than it's in right now? And do other things fall by the wayside? In election years, though, bills like this Land and Water Conservation Fund and the Great American Outdoors Act have passed and have had strong bipartisan support. My best guess is that this bill could make it into an infrastructure bill, as in it could be attached to an infrastructure bill that is developed later this year. The challenge right now is, how does Congress come back into session on a regular and daily basis and social distance at the same time until there's therapies and a vaccine? And they can have hearings virtually if they want to, but changing rules to do the necessary work, they still have not gotten there. They don't have a plan yet as to how they would mark up and pass bills in committees and then consider bills on the floor. They've just done this as it relates to the COVID virus pandemic. And they've staggered, as you've seen, if you've watched any of the voting that's happened, they send senators in groups, small groups, and then they leave the floor quickly. So there's just a lot of logistics will have to be worked out so they can get back to legislating. You may have to consider doing things like we're doing here today, which is doing things virtually, but they've not worked that out yet. I'll stop.
Any other comments for anyone, including directors? If there are none, this is one of our
we've been pursuing this so long, and it's really sad to hear it was moving along so well, and now it's stymied. But most, having 60 senators support in early March is a really wonderful thing. So we'll see.
Yeah, it was an exciting development that surprised even a lot of folks have been following this for a long time. There's some senators that have been pushing this that are up in close re-elections, talking to the president, got the president to send a tweet, and suddenly they're hosting a press conference with Democrats and Republicans standing together, pushing for this, and Leader McConnell had agreed to consider the bill, and as soon as it was ready to go, and then some other things jumped and became a higher priority and a concern. So we'll just have to watch this closely.
All right, thank you for your comments, Member Lane. Can I accept that as a motion to support this?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Eric Jekyll seconds.
All right, we have a motion by Member Lane, a second by Member Eccles. Madam Secretary, could you do a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Director Lane?
Aye.
Director Eccles?
Aye.
Chair Director Waspy?
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We're now under other federal matters. Does anyone have anything else to bring up under other federal matters? Hearing none, we'll move on to wildfire and economic preparation.
Yeah, and this is Eric Feeler, Government Affairs Manager, and I would invite our General Manager Doyle to weigh in on this, but we wanted to start the conversation about the things that we see as the sort of the post-COVID issues that we will be preparing for in dealing with both legislatively and administratively as an agency. And the two that come to mind as sort of right on the heels of this are going to be wildfire season. And then, as we've already mentioned earlier in the conversation, some of the economic challenges that the country will face. And so I don't know, Bob, if you wanted to say anything or if you just wanted staff to report on this, but I thought we'd at least start the conversation.
Well, I think it's well written up by your presentation, but a reminder to everyone is that every year it was really the last 3 years where we've had devastating fires across the state, and a lot of them very close to here. And just dealing with that was a crisis and very difficult and very costly in lives, costly in dollars. And so what we've had this year, why we've been so focused on trying to keep our parks open and get people back in to maintain the parks, is we had late rains. And those late rains are warm rains at the perfect time of year to grow grass. So it's going to be a big challenge for us to get not just our fuels crews. And I really want to bring forward to our public safety division and our fire department that we have kept our fuels crews going during this entire COVID crisis. And I just think that's an incredible piece of work by staff to do that. But we're now in a situation where we have the grass growing on every right of way, on every boundary of the park. And so I really think we're going to be challenged to get that weed abatement and the ability for fuels management on kind of the park side, not so much the fuel breaks and the fuels plan, but actually on the park side, fuels management. And we are committed to adhering to the board's direction on reducing and eliminating any chemical use, but it's going to require a lot of effort. There are times when we mow once a year, and there are times when we mow 4 times a year. So we can't hit it all at once. And so it's just already really happy to see, and I really want to express my strong appreciation to the staff who's already mowing, who's already got the equipment out there, and they can do that and maintaining their 6-foot distance from other people. Nobody wants to get next to a tractor, but it's really important that we deal with that fuels management. The second part of this is, having been through 4 economic impacts in my career at the district, it really is very feasible that we're going to see a very severe impact. It may be later than local governments, but local governments are already looking at their significant cuts to their budget, closing things, because they're really affected by sales tax first. Nobody's buying anything. And so we're in a little better position, but there is going to be some very severe budget impacts from this, no matter how long it lasts. And we need to start preparing for those. And we need to recognize that we're going to have to be all hands on deck to get Sacramento to support us when they're looking at schools, and they're looking at emergency funding, and they're looking at fire, that we can survive this next shot across our bow on economics. But I want to compliment the board for the foresight of really managing our budget very conservatively. And we have a broader portfolio than many cities, which is a big part of our success. We have a lot of different sources, i.e. we don't have sales tax, but we have a lot of other sources. But it's definitely something that we've got to immediately focus on. And I've directed Deborah Ocker for the Finance Committee to really start looking at how we prepare, what the impacts might be, We've already been notified by the county assessor that they're going to reduce what they give to us by as much as 5%, just to hold it back. So they're already talking about pulling back money from us, and that's not Sacramento, that's the county, both counties. So we really have to start preparing for this while we're still trying to figure out all the other things we have to do to keep people safe and staff safe in the parks.
What are you saying there? Are you saying that they're going to reassess? And we'll
They're
begin.
not reassessing, and if Deborah's still on the phone, she can explain that. We've been given notice that they're going to hold back a percentage to local governments just to be prepared. It doesn't mean we won't get it, but they're holding it back, and the finance committee will look into that in detail. Basically, it's just a notification now. The range we're looking at is, somewhere in the $5 million range. I think that was Alameda County. But Deborah will report on that to the finance committee, and in our finance workshop, which we're going to work on scheduling to really start focusing on the budget impacts of the COVID-19 impact.
Wow.
And just to confirm, Deborah had to jump off, but I think what we're seeing is a trend through cities and counties that they're already anticipating the challenges, and so they're making cuts now in anticipation for what's going to come in the future. And some of those examples are listed in the memo. If the chair is amenable to it, would like to potentially have a report from Lisa Baldinger on some of the fire-related activity that we've been doing with our own team, and then future communication that we're looking at, and then maybe just another word on the economic piece before we go to the next item.
I think that would be tremendous. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Lisa Baldinger, Legislative and Policy Management Analyst. To give a quick update, as Eric said, we've been working with our fire team, so Chief Eileen Tiley and Assistant Chief Brad Gallup, to best understand what work is going on. As the GM stated, this is work that has continued during this response time because it's work that we can do safely. So to give a quick update of what we heard from our fire team in terms of constraints and benefits of vegetation management during this time, is that we understand that there has been a slowdown because our teams are safely sanitizing all of their tools that they're using. That's very important, but that has resulted in less vegetation management work being done. Additionally, there's constraints in vehicles because folks have to go in vehicles individually. And so the crew sizes are ultimately smaller. However, because this is work that can be done safely and successfully, there is potential for expansion. And so we are planning to write a letter that I believe Eric referred to Sacramento to explain both the work that can be done safely and the need for this work. As the GM stated, there's been the past 3 years have been record wildfire years, and that's something that was well understood both in Sacramento and in DC at the beginning of this year. The governor's budget in January outlined $1.1 billion for one-time funding, and then $353 million in annual funding for future years. That is likely to change in the May revise in the final budget. However, we do plan to work with our delegation because due to the late rains and the growth, there is a wildfire still a threat, and that vegetation still does need to be managed. Additionally, this is work that can be done safely. Just quickly, on a federal level, as we heard in DC, both of our senators, Senator Dianne Feinstein as well as Senator Kamala Harris, have been discussing wildfire bills. Senator Feinstein's bill has yet to be advanced, and it was intended to seek for vegetation management on national forest lands, but that's since been paused. However, Senator Harris's bill, co-written with Representative Huffman, was introduced, and that's the Wildfire Defense Act. And the Wildfire Defense Act is to provide support and funding for cities and communities to do wildfire defense plans. As part of our conversations with that office in DC, they will be working with the Park District. So our 33 cities and additional communities in the East Bay will be working with us to develop appropriate plans for their areas. So that does continue to move forward.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any questions, comments on the fire report and the economic report?
Just to follow up on the fire piece, it looked like Doug jumped off, but just it is an area where we do anticipate the state continuing to spend some money. And so it is important for us to express to the governor and our delegation the work that we're doing and the needs that we have as a district. And then on the economic piece, it looks like Deborah has rejoined. So I don't know if she heard the questions from earlier about what the counties are doing with regard to funding for the park district. In the write-up, you'll note though that there are other communities that are making cuts and that the IMF has made some predictions and that the state may in fact see a $50 billion reduction in the budget, which is basically about an eighth of the state's budget. So that's why the general manager was very poignantly pointing out that we needed to be very much on our toes in Sacramento as they consider the May revise and then ultimately the June budget.
Deborah?
Hi, this is Deborah Auker, and I apologize. I had to leave to go to the Emergency Operations Center meeting, but so I did not hear the questions. It sounds like you're interested in knowing if the counties have contacted us at all, and I can give a bit of an update on that. Also, our Finance Committee is meeting on Wednesday, April 29th, and we're publishing our packet today, which does include a preliminary fiscal impacts report on how the pandemic has affected the district. You're all welcome to take a look at when that packet's published. But regarding the counties, our largest revenue source is property tax. That does flow through the counties. The assessors do the assessed valuation. The tax collector pays us the money. And they did, Alameda County tax collector did contact us and tell us that they were reducing the amount of property tax advance they were going to submit to us in our April payment by 5%. Based on their expectation that there would be additional delinquencies. So they reduced our payment by over $4 million to account for that. These are non-teeter property tax remittances that come to the district. And if those delinquencies are not realized, then they should be paid to us in the true-up payment that comes at the end of their fiscal year. Also, if the delinquencies are greater than 5%, then that would be a reduction, an additional reduction to property taxes coming to the district. Otherwise, the long-term effects of this are not really going to be felt until the next cycle, probably even 1 to 2 years out, when assessed valuations are reflecting this recession. So that's the immediate information that we have. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that I could.
Any questions of Deborah?
Yeah, I'm just curious to know. Thank you, Deborah. That's very helpful. And when you talk about the longer term effects, when do you think that might hit? I know it takes a while for people to ask for a reassessment of their properties and then have that all flow through. But what do you anticipate looking at?
Well, the county assessors are just finalizing the roll as of June. So they won't have any big changes in this roll that's going for the next tax year. Mm-hmm. For commercial properties, they do go through and process reassessments upon request for commercial properties. So that could be something that happens. Residential properties are usually held out for a while, although during the Great Recession, both Contra Costa County and Alameda County did take action to reduce residential assessed values. So we're going to watch. We won't probably know anything for 6 months on the assessed valuation side, and it probably wouldn't hit the district's budget until our 2022 fiscal year.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, that's helpful to know. And I was also wondering about, in addition to reassessments, there could be, especially on the commercial side, bankruptcies and other things that could impact the tax revenues. So how much do you think that will play into effect?
Well, I think those types of foreclosure actions fall into the delinquency
Oh, I see, yeah.
category. And then when properties are foreclosed on, the property tax comes kind of off the top of the sale. So it's a long process to get through all of that.
Right. Okay. Got it. And then what are the other the big areas that could impact our budget? I mean, obviously property taxes, most of the budget, but, certainly if these various contracts and reservations and other falls through, how much will that
Right.
impact?
Well, currently our charges for services, of course, are impacted. We've provided over $400,000 in refunds to people that had made reservations since March. We had previously in this meeting talked about relief for concessionaires, which is also an item on the agenda for the Finance Committee, to talk about how we can give them a little bit of relief on the payments that are due to the district. So charges for services definitely could be affected by, even if we didn't have a summer season this year, it could be $5 million. But the report does lay out a lot of these details, so I'm happy to email that to you. And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
those are the largest areas right now.
Thank you. Yeah, if you could share that by email, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
I think it'd be wonderful you'd email it to all the directors. I think that's going to be a very, very important report.
I will do that, Director Waspy.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your report. Any further questions of Deborah? Thank you very much, Deborah. And Eric, were you, any more good news?
I think we can move on to the next item and we can try to go through that quickly. I understand we've been
Okay.
on for a fair bit.
Pardon me, any directors have any comments on the wildfire and economic preparation? Hearing none, my only comment would be, boy, this reminds me when we talk about the greatest economic disaster since the Great Depression. I was reading a book on history of the Park District last night, and I saw those CCC camps and WPA projects up in Tilden, and boy, we might be in line for those, it sounds like.
Exactly, Dennis. Actually, I've been thinking the same thing. And when we're talking about these bonds and other things, that's what I think the government should be doing, is creating jobs for people, because I think we're almost at that point now.
Yeah.
We're at that point. It's probably fair to say.
Okay, so we'll move right along to the district outreach to elected officials about the parks during shelter-in-place order.
And so we wanted to put this on, Eric Feeler, Government Affairs Manager. We wanted to put this on just to let folks know. I know things have been very operationally focused and budget focused, but that the Government Affairs team has been engaging with electeds at this time. And in fact, in some ways, it's almost easier to get a hold of them right now because they are also sheltering in place and available to us. And so we did put together a PowerPoint. I'm hoping that Yuli can bring it up to show some of the things that we've been working on. But it's been a very interesting time to do outreach to elected officials' office, and we'll run through some of these slides, and Lisa and Yuli will be helping assist us go through this somewhat quickly, hopefully. So next slide, Yuli. This is just the letters that we discussed earlier that we sent to the Treasury Secretary and then also the governor, requesting $7 million in local assistance funding. And then on the left is the letter that the delegation sent on our behalf in support of that request. I was informed during this meeting that that letter has gone, was in all the board members' packets in the early April packet. But we can certainly send the copy around again if people would like. But this was a catch by Peter to, as he mentioned earlier, to make sure that we got our placeholder letter in the queue, because the requirement under the CARES Act required a letter from your executive manager, general manager, submitted to the secretary, and some other paperwork that we filed through our finance team. And go to the next slide, please. And we actually got a submission confirmation that we were able to, that we saw that we had been, our application had been accepted. Doesn't mean the money's gonna come yet, but at least we were accepted. So next slide, please. And this is just a quick reminder of all the different offices that we're engaging in with social media and other outreach efforts. They're all doing teletown halls and meetings right now and messaging. So we've been able to take advantage of some of that. Next slide, please. We have also taken to writing on a somewhat regular basis. I would say weekly, but I don't think it's quite been weekly. Reminders to our elected officials and their staff of things that are happening in the Park District. For example, when we did have the Easter changes in what was open and what wasn't. Also the rules about social distancing and our virtual naturalist programming. Some of those things that we know if we send it to staff, that they will either rebroadcast it on social media or in their newsletters, because they're all looking for good news to tell people at this time. Next slide. And so I'd mentioned that everybody's doing teletown halls and other conference calls, and these are just some of the folks that we've already had some interaction with. The mayor of Concord, Beverly, you were able to participate in his town hall, which I thought was actually quite a fascinating experience to watch that. Director Eccles, you were able to participate with Senator Skinner in one of her teletown halls, which was also great and very well done. We had a meeting recently with our chair, not our chair, but our president of the board, Director Corbett and Rob Bonta. And then we've also had some other outreach to the mayor of Oakland and Bill Quirk. And actually, one of the most lasting memories will be Director Waspy and our phone call with Bill Quirk, where he put up a backdrop of some kind of space scene that looked straight out of Star Trek, and it really fit for Bill Quirk's personality. I wish I'd taken a screenshot of it, but I and this is what's happened with our broadcasting to the staff, is we're starting to get the echo chamber going with other entities. So Bill Quirk and Mark DeSaulnay, Nancy Skinner, Libby Schaff. And I wanted to give Lisa an opportunity here to talk a little bit about both the social media work that she's been working on with the broader group in the district, and also some of the Together Bay Area social media messaging. So Lisa, if you're able to chime in, that'd be great.
Me too. Lisa Baldinger, Legislative and Policy Management Analyst. As you can see on your screen, with the emails that Government Affairs has been sending out to our full delegation, we've been having them amplified. So to give you an idea, the East Bay Parks Twitter alone has 14.4 thousand followers. So those individuals receive tweets on our pages, but as we share with, for instance, Mayor Libby Schaff or Senator Nancy Skinner, all of their followers see those same messages. And so that's the benefit of the email communication, because we're able to get in contact with folks that we have relationships with to further amplify our message. And so it was wonderful to see Congressman DeSaulnay's staff, Assemblymember Bill Quirk's amplify what we had to say about Easter closures. And since then, some posts have been put out about our Naturalist at Home program, some good news and some things for their constituents to do at home. Next slide, please. Thank you. We can go ahead and play this one. Well, it doesn't seem that there is sound on this video, but we'll work on that. But this is a video in which Mayor Libby Schaff shared some advice. And what's important, and as Eric referenced, Together Bay Area, we've been sharing our practices on social media, because though folks are sheltering in place and recreating in their local areas, they are communicating with each other. So the more that we remind people to stay 6 feet apart, request that they carry and wear a mask when within close distance of others in open space, leave no trace practices, etc. The more we all say that, the more it's heard. And so kindly, some of our elected officials have helped to share that information. Next slide, please.
You want to try to?
Oh,
out
there we
in
go.
our parks do remain open, but please be sure you follow strict social distancing guidelines. Do not touch any physical structures out in our parks. To learn more, you can go to East Bay Regional Parks website to get more information about which facilities are open.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yuli. Additionally, with elected officials sharing a great deal of information at this time, we've had success in sharing both the social distancing policy in our parks as well as our virtual naturalist program. So this is an example of a few of the county supervisors, John Joya, Karen Mitchoff, and Richard Val, who have shared our message. As Eric referenced, Director Lane was able to join a teletown hall with the mayor of Concord and share information about the park district. I'm not sure if you have anything to add, Director Lane, about your experience.
No, it was very rewarding, and also it was interesting for me to stay there all morning and listen to their finance person talk about what they were confronting with problems with sales tax and their hotel tax. So those are huge incomes for them, and they've gone in the tank. So it was informal and very informative, I thought.
Wonderful, and we're hoping to see these
slides. People put slides together for me. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Yuli. All right, and then also we're doing some legislative one-on-ones. So as Eric referenced, we had one recently with Assembly Member Bill Quirk and Director Waspy. This is a screenshot of President Ellen Corbett with Assembly Member Rob Bonta. A really wonderful outcome of this discussion is that we will be now working on our first walk and talk tele-town hall, in which we're going to be working with James Frank out at Crab Cove to get a Crab Cove naturalist, the Assembly Member, and President Corbett onto a town hall forum to engage our public on what's going on in the parks, as well as what's going on with the creatures at Crab Cove and how they're doing during this time. So being able to have a mix of topics, both about safety and updates on the COVID pandemic and legislation, but also just about a little bit lighter topic of the critters at a Crab Cove. And so we're hoping to do this teletown hall format with others elected officials, being that this is continuing forward at this time.
I think I'm jumping in again, Eric Feeler, Government Affairs Manager. So this is just sort of the next steps that we'll be working on in the next couple of weeks. So next slide, please. We mentioned the Land and Water Conservation Fund op-ed in the Chronicle, and then our general manager's response to that. We intend to get this out to all the elected offices, asking them and encouraging them to retweet and rebroadcast it in whatever means that they are using to get the word out. We particularly want to make sure that folks in DC have access to this and see this as something that can impact the legislation that we talked about earlier in the Senate that combines LWCF and the infrastructure maintenance funding. Next slide, please. This was a campaign, and I actually should let Lisa talk about this, but this is a campaign that we're working on with public affairs for promoting our parks and our staff and our foundation. Lisa, can you go ahead and over?
Happy to. So this, let's see, on the right side of our screen, we have an image of the I Am EBRPD campaign coming from the East Bay Regional Park District. The focus of this campaign is to elevate and bring to our social media our different members of staff. So here you can see a park ranger putting up safety signs. We also have images of our firefighter staff, our sign creators, our naturalists doing their virtual engagement. And so it's I Am EBRPD, and it gives a description of what that individual's contribution is. And then together, the hashtag is We Are EBRPD, and that we're all in this together and working together to keep parks safe and open at this time. And so we really wanted to bringing forward the contributions that our staff has brought in order to make parks safe and open during a time of shelter in place. And then here on behalf of the Regional Park Foundation, their separate campaign is the Love EBRPD campaign, and using quotes and testaments from members of the public, the Regional Park Foundation is sharing what folks in the East Bay and from around us are grateful for at this time. So thanking the Park District or saying what they're enjoying visiting in the park districts during this time of shelter in place.
And the purpose of showing you those last two slides is just that we're going to be rebroadcasting that to electeds and asking them to promote those campaigns in their communications as well. We talked earlier about the federal infrastructure possible package with Peter, and provided him and actually all of you a copy of our sort of one-page flyer, front and back flyer, expressing some of the things that we'd like to see in an infrastructure package. This is a quick list here of them. But again, number 3 there, the state and local assistance is really probably the one that would be the most robust in terms of helping the district. I know the chair is very much interested in securing more personal protective equipment, so that is part of our ask. In addition to some of the other things that we've talked about with regard to transportation, wildfire, flood protection. The bottom one on technology and communications is kind of threefold at least, maybe more. We have some upgrades that we need for public safety and some of the radio equipment. We also have technology needs now for just our daily business. What we're doing right now is a new normal, and so we need some capacity to do board meetings and other district-related work. And then the third piece of it is telling the story of our virtual naturalists, using technology to be educators, to reach into classrooms, help parents, keep their kids occupied while they're working from home. So we really wanted to see something in an infrastructure package that addresses the technological needs of local governments at this time when we're kind of being overloaded with technology and the need for more capacity. Next slide. And then we are in the works doing more meetings with some of you all and some of our electeds. I know we have a meeting with Barbara Lee coming up on Thursday of next week. And then we have in the queue some of these other folks that you see on the screen here. Rebecca Bauer-Cahan will try to connect you with her. And then Director Eccles will try to connect you with Senator Skinner, and I know our board president was also interested in that conversation. And so we'll keep you as we can get these things lined up. I have to say, and I really want to congratulate or acknowledge Yuli's role in doing the outreach when we see these town halls come up, really being on it and trying to make sure that we're connecting you all with our other electeds, sometimes at the last minute, but we're going to try to get better at that and maybe have more of a schedule coming up. Next slide. I guess that's it. And I guess Lisa did mention the idea of virtual town halls, so walk and talks. So we would, for those of you on the committee that would be interested in that, we would like to try to start setting those up. It does take some work, but I think once we get through the first one with Rob Bonta, we'll know what the kinks are and we'll work those out and we'll get around to all of you so that we're including all the board members in those kinds of activities. And that is our work.
So are these our town halls that we are setting up?
Yeah, so like when we've done walk and talks with Director Corbett did them when she was in the Senate and the Assembly. We would arrange for a naturalist to be at the park, the appropriate board member, and then the elected official. And so we would be doing the same combination of people, but we would be doing it all virtually. So you would be doing the walk and talk from the comfort of your own home, but we would at least virtually with their constituents and our constituents.
You know, what we might do is use a term besides town hall, like a virtual picnic or a virtual,
Yeah,
it's more parky than a town hall.
just don't gather in a picnic area.
Well, no, we're doing it from home, right? We're not in a hall, we're in a park.
Yeah, I like your idea, Beverly. You could do a virtual walk in the park. Or yours sounds more inviting, but yeah, no, I think it's an interesting idea. And I'd be interested in doing one too, so you can put me down.
Yeah.
Yeah, we might be able to do some backgrounds that are photographs too. Is that possible? Could be.
Yes.
Okay.
That'd be good. Yeah.
All right. So was that it, Eric? Thank you so much. It was great presentation, and I'm so happy about all this outreach you're doing to our locals, because I think they're depending on us as much as we're depending on them during this time. So if there are no further comments, we'll move to the articles and media. I hope everybody got their copies of that. If anybody have any comments or questions about the articles that are coming out? Okay, then let's move on to open forum public comments. So we're doing this a little differently, as you all know. So on your screen, you'll see the public comment. Madam Secretary, I see we have one public comment. And I'm not sure if I can read this and everyone on this Zoom conference can read it. Do we, Madam Secretary, would you mind reading this publicly?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we do have one public comment from Kelly Abreu with Mission Peak Conservancy. He addresses the board legislative committee. The economic downturn, his statement is, the economic downturn will impact district finances over the long term, as was pointed out by the general manager earlier this week. East Bay cities have begun to cut budgets and reduce programs. Changes to revenue streams will affect the bottom line for the district. The easy adjustments are being done short term, but difficult structure changes will take longer. This committee and the board will have to review options and revise plans. The priority has to be to serve local communities by providing access to nature. Signed, Kelly with Mission Peak Conservancy.
All right, we'll now move to board comments. Are there any board comments? Seeing none, my only comment would be, Peter, it's great to hear from you. It's great to see you. I'm glad everybody's healthy and doing well back in Washington. Thank you for all your great work and your advocacy. Doug, if you're still with us, thank you also. It's an interesting way to meet, but I think it was very productive. And staff, that slide you had up there on the screen that said, what will we do next? I'm always amazed by the things you're doing, and I always am wondering what you're going to do next too, but it's always great and positive for the Park District. And thank you for staying on top of this. If I can quote Peter, he said, there's lots of money coming out of Washington and we need to be on it. And I think we are, and I'm very happy for that. Oh, and pardon me, also, Yuli and Harold, thank you very much for all the technical support you've given us. So our last item is the general manager's comments. Bob?
Well, you've had a very full legislative committee. I'm extremely pleased with having committees start up again. And I want to also express my appreciation to staff. This is new for everybody, including the staff, trying to put these together. I think it's very effective. I will announce that we do anticipate having the ability for people to call in live, hopefully by the May 5th board meeting. So that's a top priority. And We will do the board meetings first, and then we will do committees after that, because we'll have to do some additional training. But first priority is get the public board meetings up to par that way, and then we'll start rolling in the committee meetings as well. So we are scheduling committee meetings. We do hope to schedule the board capital finance workshop, get that put together, because I think it's critical right now to look at the finances and what we are doing. We have actually, I'm very pleased to see a lot of projects are still going to be coming to you to keep people employed and get our projects done. So I think you'll be pleased when you see those coming up. You will see several at the next board meeting for action. And so the staff's out there really adapting and adjusting and being creative and doing the people's work. Again, my motto is we're doing our part, and I think everybody's working hard to do that. So appreciate it. You will get a Friday update sometime when I get off this call. And we'll finish that up and get that out to the board and all staff on the activities to communicate that way. I do hope the board does see the letter to the editor on land and water. Got a lot of positive response from general public on that, but we're still tracking very favorably that people really are appreciating having parks in this time, and they know it's hard. And talked to a lot of staff in the field, and they're doing their best, and we'll continue to do our job as best we can at this time. It's been a very challenging time, but I thank the board for their patience, and I thank the staff for all their hard work, and we're going to keep on keeping on. And happy 50th anniversary Earth Day yesterday. And it's something to think about now when you look at all of the legislation that was created, that is our body of environmental legislation in the 70s, that now we're back almost starting over again. And so it was great to see a big ad by Pete McCloskey. I think probably Peter will remember that name. A decorated Marine, Republican legislator from the peninsula who has written his memoir of the 70s. He was one of the first legislators to put together the very first Earth Day, which I actually got to participate in high school. And so it's good now more than ever to think about that and how we get young people to really relate to what we do to preserve parks and keep our earth healthy. So it's my little Earth Day sermon, but it's really a good time to be thinking about how we engage young people and families today to help us protect our parks and our earth. So thank you all for all your hard work, and thank you board members for bearing with us during this challenging time. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Bob. And if there's nothing further, stay safe. We are adjourned. It is 2:57 p.m. Take care.
Have a great weekend. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Yuli.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yuli.